This story is titled Living in the Shadow of My Star Sister, My Revenge Story. Hi, everyone. Before we dive a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It is free. Supports the channel and make sure you never miss out on amazing video. Alright, let us get started. I spent most of my life being treated unfairly because of my so-called golden child sister. And on my wedding day, I finally got a bit of sweet revenge. For as long as I can remember, my parents made it crystal clear who their favorite was, and it definitely wasn't me. If she pointed a finger at me, they'd take her word as gospel and punish me on the spot. But if I brought up something she did, even with obvious proof, they'd either brush it off or give her a slap on the wrist while finding a way to blame me too. My birthday cakes were always in her favorite flavor, one I couldn't stand, and my parents would act surprised like they'd forgotten again. They'd always buy her more gifts and take us places she wanted to go, even when it was supposed to be my special day. My sister was spoiled rotten and treated me like her personal punching bag. In the beginning, she mostly ignored me. But once we hit our teenage years, things escalated. She didn't really have friends anymore, and her behavior went downhill fast. I'm not sure if her friends moved away or if they simply cut ties because of how she acted. Truth is, we were never close enough for me to know. My parents only ever bragged about her accomplishments and conveniently left out any of her issues. Meanwhile, they constantly pointed out my flaws and framed it as teasing. The only reason I even knew she didn't have friends was because we went to the same school, and I noticed she was always alone. On the flip side, I got along with people and had a decent social circle. Once she realized that, something in her shifted. I went from being an occasional target to a full-blown enemy. Suddenly, she was accusing me and my friends of all kinds of nonsense. That was enough for my parents to step in and clamp down. They stopped letting me hang out with anyone, throwing around excuses like, "Your sister says they're bad influences," or, "Why can't you just stay home and enjoy family time like your sister?" What saved me from total isolation was my extended family. Most of them lived nearby, and I was lucky to have strong bonds with my cousins, even if some were older or younger than me. At one gathering, they invited me to something, I honestly don't remember what, and I said no, explaining in the blunt way only a kid can that I wasn't allowed to have friends because my sister didn't have any. Apparently, that comment made it back to the adults, and from what I heard later, they tore into my parents over it. Of course, I got punished, accused of lying and grounded for a month, but after that, my parents loosened the reins a little. Honestly, it was worth it. Not long after that, my sister switched schools. I can only assume the embarrassment of our extended family knowing about her lack of social life was too much for her. She demanded a change, and my parents didn't hesitate to make it happen, even though it meant paying more and driving further. At the new school, she managed to make some friends. But instead of going back to ignoring me, she doubled down on her obsession. I guess she realized how easy it was to make my life harder, and she resented me for exposing the truth to the family. From that point on, she never let up. Life stayed rough. Her new friends would come over and openly mock me, and my parents brushed it off as harmless teasing. I never invited anyone over myself, not just because of my sister, but also because my parents were terrible hosts. On top of that, if one of my friends so much as looked at something in the house, my sister would accuse them of stealing, and my parents would believe her. Thankfully, my cousins remained a safe haven. My parents didn't dare treat extended family the way they treated me. Eventually, I got my first boyfriend. I was nervous about bringing him home, but my parents insisted on meeting him. One day, we were separated for a bit, and he came to find me, visibly shaken. He told me my sister had shown up wearing practically nothing, batting her eyelashes and trying to flirt. She even started trash-talking me, telling him how awful I was and how amazing she'd be for him. He was put off and immediately walked away to find me. Naturally, my sister told my parents a different version, that he had hit on her, and she turned him down because she'd never do that to me. Guess who my parents believed? Spoiler alert, not me. Now, I won't pretend that boyfriend was perfect, but I did believe him. And yeah, part of that belief came from the resentment I'd been holding in. I was an angry, bitter teenager who hated how unfair everything was. I hated my sister, and honestly, I wasn't ashamed of it. Let's talk looks, just for a second. My parents were both overweight and liked to show love through food, extra portions, endless snacks, constant treats. My sister took after them in that way. I didn't. I stayed fairly thin, mostly because part of my punishments often involved withholding food and treats. And no, looks aren't everything. But back then, even with all my teenage insecurity, I just didn't buy that my boyfriend would be tempted by my sister. She was rude, spoiled, and had zero charm. She'd never had to work for anything in her life, and it showed. Even her flirting was clumsy. Of course, my parents banned me from seeing that terrible boy. We tried to keep dating in secret, but it was hard. Eventually, the relationship just fizzled out. Later, I started seeing someone new. And once again, my sister pulled the same stunt: flirting, rejection, false accusation. My parents believed her again. I tried to point out the pattern, but instead of seeing the obvious, they said I had terrible judgment and kept picking bad guys. That relationship crumbled under the pressure too. By the end of high school, I was known as the girl who was okay with making out but never actually dated anyone. I caught some flack for that, even got called a slut, but thankfully, that gossip never made its way back to my parents or my sister. Funny thing is, my sister did bring a boyfriend home once during all this. My parents rolled out the red carpet. They couldn't stop raving about how amazing he was, and asked why I couldn't be more like her, why I couldn't find a guy like that. That was, of course, until he disappeared. Then suddenly, he was a manipulative creep who used her. And just like that, the narrative flipped again. The favoritism never stopped. She got more spending money. She had later curfews. She was free to go wherever, whenever. I wasn't. If I brought it up, my parents would say, "She's older." But when I got to the same age, the rules somehow didn't apply to me. When I called them out, they denied ever saying that, or claimed that I wasn't trustworthy, like your sister, using her false accusations as proof. Eventually, she graduated high school and got accepted into a college. Not a great one, and she didn't earn any scholarships either. But still, they praised her like she'd just gotten into the Ivy League. I still don't know which colleges my sister even applied to, since my parents only ever told me about her successes. So, I can't say how many places rejected her. What I do know is that her grades were consistently low. In our house, A B on her report card was cause for a full-blown celebration. I, on the other hand, regularly brought home high grades, but that was never treated as an accomplishment. According to my parents, there was no need to celebrate something I always did anyway. Of course, when it came time for college, they made a huge fuss over her acceptance. My parents promised to cover all her expenses, no questions asked. I was just glad she'd finally be out of the house, even if that didn't really make things easier for me. She still came home every other weekend, and somehow, every visit brought a new problem. Things would go missing from my room, or she'd stir up some drama just to keep me on edge. My curfew stayed just as strict as ever. Not long before my own graduation, my mom pulled me aside for the talk. I'm only a year younger than my sister, so my time was right around the corner. She told me, very matter-of-factly, that because they were paying for my sister's college, they couldn't afford to pay for mine. She said it would be better for me to start working right after graduation. Maybe, if I waited until my sister finished college, they'd revisit the idea. Oh, and if I planned to live at home after high school, I'd have to start paying rent, utilities, and buy everything for myself. I mentioned that I could take out student loans. My mom said, yes, well, no, claiming that they loved me too much to let me make poor financial decisions. They would decide which colleges were worth going into debt for. I didn't push it. I didn't even ask how they thought they could stop me from applying for loans. I just let it slide. They never brought up scholarships. Honestly, I don't think they even knew what my grades looked like at that point. They never asked and never seemed to believe in me anyway. I didn't react. I just said, okay. My mom clearly wasn't expecting that. She kept pushing, asking how I felt, probably hoping I'd snap so they could justify cutting me off completely. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. I calmly thanked her for being honest and said I understood. My dad tried the same routine later. Same result. By that point, I'd already accepted the truth. They were never going to help me. I'd stopped expecting anything from them when it came to my future. I knew deep down they'd find a way to block me from going to college, or at least try to. So, I planned around it. While my social life was pretty much non-existent, I'd use that time to bury myself in books. I studied hard because I saw college as my only shot at real freedom. Eventually, all that work paid off. I earned a full scholarship, not to an Ivy League school or a top medical program, but to a solid university with a decent reputation and a course I was genuinely interested in. That was enough for me. But I knew my sister would lose her mind, and try to get my parents to stop me. So, I announced the news publicly. I made a cheerful social media post, tagging my parents and thanking them for always supporting me, while telling them in person at the same time. It was strategic. Now, if they tried to prevent me from going, they'd have to explain it to the whole family. At first, they played along, pretended to be proud. But soon after, they started changing their tune. I assume my sister got to them, because they started poking holes in the plan, asking if I was sure I wanted to go. They even admitted my sister wasn't doing well in college, and since she was so much smarter and more responsible, I'd probably crash and burn. I ignored the noise. I held my ground, and in the end, they couldn't stop me. College saved me. It gave me a real taste of independence and a chance to start building a life that had nothing to do with their constant judgment. I still kept in touch, holiday visits, polite conversations, but since they weren't contributing anything financially, it was easy to excuse my absence when needed. During that time, I avoided bringing any boyfriends around. And at some point, my sister just stopped going to college. I know she didn't graduate. If she had, my parents would have thrown a parade. She ended up moving back home, paying no rent or bills. Naturally, my parents said that was different. She got a job at the same company as my mom, which clearly only happened because of her connections. This, too, was presented to me as a proud family achievement. Almost done, I promise. Around this time, I met my now husband. You know those people who always say, if I were in that situation, I'd have said something. Yeah, my husband's the guy who actually does say something. Me. I'm the one who freezes in the moment, then lies awake later wishing I'd thought of a good comeback. I'm the one who gets choked up when I'm mad. But not him. He's sharp, quick with a clapback, and absolutely thrives on conflict if he thinks someone's being unfair. If someone wrongs him and he doesn't respond immediately, it's not because he forgot, it's because he's planning something worse. He doesn't just like drama, he orchestrates it when necessary. He's the one who encouraged me to post our story here. He even wanted to share it on one of the nuclear revenge forums but eventually decided our plan didn't quite reach that level of destruction. Honestly, people are surprised we ended up together, but just because I don't act like him doesn't mean I don't admire it. He's my opposite, but in all the right ways. And best of all, he's fiercely loyal. He only goes after people who treat others like crap. When we started planning our wedding, we agreed we didn't care much about the ceremony itself. We had a modest budget and decided we'd rather splurge on our dream honeymoon in Europe than blow it all on one night. Since his side of the family was spread out, but mine still lived mostly in our hometown, we figured it made sense to have the wedding there. We didn't live too far away, and we could make it work by taking some weekend trips and adjusting our schedules. Once the engagement was official, we sent out announcements and save the date cards. That's when my parents, of course, insisted on meeting my fiancée. I wanted to say no. I really wanted to grow a backbone and refuse. But the distance from them had softened my memories a bit, and I started second-guessing myself. When I told my husband I'd arrange a supervised meeting and make sure he was never alone with them, his face dropped. He looked like I'd just cancelled his birthday. He had plans, okay. He'd bought a high-quality voice recorder, ready to tuck it discreetly into his pocket. He was excited to see how my sister might try flirting with him so he could shut her down and play the audio back for everyone. He was practically giddy about the chaos potential. So I let him go, alone. And when he got back, he was practically vibrating with excitement. Babe, you're not gonna believe what they said. We can destroy them with this. I was confused at first and asked to hear the recording, but he told me to let him explain first or else I'd misinterpret it. So I listened. Turns out, there was no flirting. Instead, my sister and my parents sat him down, did a little song and dance about how they didn't approve of him or my judgment, and then dropped the real kicker. They said they'd be willing to pay for our wedding, on one condition. My parents insisted that my sister would walk down the aisle at my wedding, in a wedding dress. Yes, seriously. Their reasoning? Since it wasn't appropriate for the younger sister to get married first, they felt it was only fair that my sister at least experience what it was like. At my venue. With my photographer. In a wedding dress. Oh, and there'd be cake afterward, of course. Now, I'll let my husband take it from here for a bit. Hey there, vengeful husband reporting in. Let's just say, when your in-laws pull this kind of stunt, you thank the gods you spent years lurking in the pro-revenge and nuclear karma forums. Because when my wife, yes, wife now, told me how she'd grown up, I knew I'd burn down the whole circus if they ever tried something like this. That said, despite how she hypes me up as this snappy, cool under pressure guy, I'll admit, my brain short-circuited when they actually said that. Like, I could hear the dial-up tone inside my skull. I mean, even the Trojans would rather open the horse again than sit through that pitch. Once I mentally rebooted, I had a dozen cutting comebacks locked and loaded. But instead of unleashing them, something in me whispered, no. String these fools along. So I told them I needed time to think it over. Said I'd see how my fiancé felt. Then I politely made my exit, before I cracked a grin and ruined everything. Back to me. When my husband told me, with receipts, what my family was planning, I was stunned. I'd convinced myself maybe they weren't that bad anymore. Distance can dull even the worst memories. But this crossed a line I didn't even think they'd touch. Thankfully, my husband was ecstatic about the revenge angle, and that kept me grounded instead of spiraling. We spent hours brainstorming ideas, from ridiculous and theatrical to realistic and doable. Eventually, we called his very sensible brother to run one of them by him, just to make sure we wouldn't get sued. Our initial plan: have 2 venue addresses, give my family the wrong one, and enjoy the chaos. His brother vetoed that one pretty fast. He admitted he couldn't stop us from getting revenge, he knows us too well, but reminded us we still had to deal with legal contracts and vendors. So we dialed it back. What we settled on wasn't the most dramatic option, but it was airtight. We'd pretend to agree to the plan, then hire security and not let my sister in. But that wasn't all. Because if you know my husband, you know he wasn't about to let it end there. So here's what we did. First, he went back to my parents and told them he'd tested the waters with me. Claimed I wasn't totally on board, but I was non-confrontational, so maybe I wouldn't make a scene if it just happened. He played the angle that marriage is a big deal, though, and there was always a chance I might snap. To help avoid drama, he proposed a compromise. They'd help pay for parts of the wedding. That way, I'd feel indebted and less likely to ruin anything if surprised. It was manipulative, and beautifully ironic, because he fed them their own playbook. According to him, my parents looked stunned. My grown sister. She literally skipped with joy. It was disgusting. And hilarious. But wait, it gets better. My husband also told them, very seriously, that due to my past poor judgment, I had become controlling and paranoid. I always checked his phone. I was jealous. And I would absolutely blow up if I found out what was going on ahead of time. So for my mental health, he said, nothing should be written down. All discussions needed to happen in person. I'm still giddy about how we turned their manipulative tactics right back on them. Over the next few months, my parents and sister thought they were secretly plotting the perfect scheme. But really, we were milking them the whole time. They didn't fund the entire wedding, but they covered a lot, and all because they thought we were too polite, or too dumb, to catch on. They also wanted control over everything, from the music to the color scheme. My husband would convince them to back off, citing, keeping me in line, while letting them feel like they were getting their way. Meanwhile, we played them like fiddles. We'd go sample drinks and food and always pick the cheapest or second cheapest option. Then my husband would secretly take my sister to try the better options and sigh dramatically, saying, "It's a shame we can't pick this, it would upset the bride." Cue my sister demanding the best. My parents would then tell me, "Don't worry, we'll upgrade. You deserve the best." Classic manipulation. We repeated the same strategy with flowers, the photographer, you name it. My husband handed my sister a bouquet of our chosen flowers and acted disappointed that I wanted ugly ones. You can guess how that played out. Only one thing threw a wrench into the plan, the dress. My parents wanted me to wear a gown that was, let's just say, not me. It wasn't hideous, but it was outdated, didn't fit my style, and would have looked awkward on me. We'd planned to just say yes and then not use it. But my mom texted me a message asking me to confirm, so we couldn't risk having it in writing. I stood my ground and refused to reply. My husband stepped in and said he'd try to sway me. My sister, in her usual brilliance, suggested ruining my preferred dress so I'd be forced to wear theirs. He pretended to agree. All communication from that point stayed off text. My sister did try to message my husband directly, but I intercepted and responded myself. That helped support his narrative that I was controlling, paranoid, and overbearing, which only deepened their trust in him. And honestly, the idea of my husband pretending I was this emotional tyrant while I egged him on in the background? It was so absurd it became a running joke between us. I mean, I've always been a bit of a doormat, so the contrast was hilarious. Oh, and yes, my sister did try to flirt with him. He acted conflicted just enough to sell the illusion. But never once let her know we'd hired security. Here's the kicker, we'd originally considered a low-key courthouse wedding so we could splurge on our honeymoon. Instead, we got a lavish, upscale ceremony almost entirely paid for by people who actively tried to sabotage me. My husband called it reimbursement for emotional damages. And honestly, he might have enjoyed the plotting more than the wedding planning itself. I never thought I'd see a man beaming while spending hours with his in-laws just to waste their time and money, but he pulled it off. Finally, the big day arrived. The plan, according to them, was for my sister to arrive just after all the guests were seated. The idea was that, since the bride traditionally arrives last, no one would expect it when she walked down the aisle first in a wedding gown. By the time I found out, it'd be too late to stop her. What they didn't know. Security had their names, their plan, and a firm list of who wasn't getting in. And we were just getting started. As for my dress, we saved some of the leftover fabric from my dress alterations. My husband took that to my parents' place, where my sister still lived, and showed it to them as fake proof he'd ruined my dress. Then he said he had to go calm me down because I was raging. He told them he'd see them at the wedding. We kept our real security discreet at first. When guests and my parents arrived, they were greeted only by a woman checking names. After my parents had settled in, we brought out the actual security, a guy who looked like a full-blown bodyguard. We instructed him not to let my sister in and promised him a generous tip for his silence. Soon, the moment arrived. My parents got a text that my sister was less than 5 minutes away, so my dad gave the signal to start the ceremony. My bridesmaids, prepped to follow his lead, did just that. My dad stood at the entrance, waiting for me. Meanwhile, a friend not in the bridal party texted me a heads up so no one would get suspicious if my bridesmaids or husband messaged me. This friend, a drama-loving ally of my husband's, didn't mind skipping bridesmaid duties in exchange for stirring chaos. As soon as my dad took his place, the music began. The doors opened, and I walked in. My dad was stunned. He tried to look past me, confused, probably wondering what had happened to my sister. Then his phone rang. It was her. He muttered something vague, said he had to go, and left me standing there. A wave of gasps and confusion rolled through the crowd. My friend loudly asked, "What happened?" and I tearfully told her. He said I wasn't supposed to be the one walking in. That was our plan. If my dad bailed, I'd say that line to make him look as awful as possible. And while I was partly acting, the tears were real, I was genuinely hurt. My friend followed up even louder. What did he mean by that? And then ran off, as planned, to stall and stop my dad from returning. Soon after, my mom left too. That's when my husband's dad jumped into action. He'd been prepped to take over if needed, and he ran to my side, took my arm, and smiled. His eagerness to help made me smile too. I walked down the aisle to the sound of whispers and murmurs. People had no idea what was going on, but they were intrigued. When I reached my husband, everything felt okay again. He comforted me, whispered that my sad face deserved an Oscar, and promised he'd handle everything. We got married without any further hiccups. My parents didn't come back. Throughout the reception, I noticed guests coming and going, whispering, looking uneasy. Someone leaned in and told my husband something. He slipped out, then came back trying hard not to smile. He whispered that he needed to hide or he'd break character. Later, I got the full story. My sister had shown up in a wedding dress. Security stopped her, telling her she must be at the wrong venue, there was already a bride here. He played it perfectly and yes, we tipped him very well. My dad lost it. Claimed he didn't recognize the guard, accused him of being fake. Security calmly offered to call the police. My dad realized that wouldn't help and tried to force entry. That's when our friend showed up and began loudly insulting my sister and demanding answers. She stalled perfectly. Soon, more people showed up. By then, the secret was out. People were horrified that my parents had tried this. They panicked and tried damage control. They blamed my husband. Said it was all his idea. But when he was called over, my husband went full actor. He looked confused and said, "Wait, what? Why would I agree to something like that?" They insisted he had. He said, "Do you have proof?" Of course, they didn't. No texts. Nothing in writing. Just their word. He said, "So let me get this straight, you want me to believe I agreed to let your daughter walk down the aisle at my wedding, and there's no proof? Just vibes?" Then he gave them a taste of their own medicine, tore into them about being selfish, manipulative, and toxic. Then he left them there and came back to me. No one believed them. The venue had security footage, but they couldn't share it. Luckily, guests caught videos of the drama. And watching my parents and sister get absolutely destroyed by guests outside was the most cathartic moment of my life. My mom was crying. My dad looked like he was going to explode. My sister was full meltdown mode, screaming, crying, kicking on the ground. They kept trying to convince people my husband was in on it. But people weren't buying it. When asked why he'd agree, or why they didn't have proof, they had no answers. Eventually, they were kicked out. My dad had to drag my sister away because she refused to leave the ground. Inside, people treated me with kindness. It felt like, for once, I was the bride, not just an afterthought. My husband joked that maybe it was the expensive food and drinks winning them over. Either way, the reception was a blast. We spent the night laughing and soaking up the happiness. We skipped their attempt to pay for our honeymoon tickets. Figured it wasn't worth the risk. They might cancel them out of spite. After the wedding, they kept trying to contact me. I ignored the calls. My husband wanted a paper trail. Smart move. My sister eventually messaged me. I won't repeat the entire meltdown, but here are the highlights. She blamed me for her humiliation, called my husband a two-faced snake, he wants to frame that, and said she hoped he'd cheat on me, then claimed he already was, with her. That's when my husband grabbed my phone, took screenshots of everything, and dropped it all in the family group chat. He added a heartfelt message, begging the family to stop the harassment, asking them to please protect us, and pleading that no one leak our honeymoon location in case my sister tried to seduce him there. Yes, he said that. And yes, it was glorious. The family backed us up. Since then, peace and quiet. My husband's only regret is that my sister didn't try anything else so he could publicly tear her apart again. Maybe one day. All in all, I would have preferred a warm, supportive family. But at least, for once, they didn't ruin something important to me. If anything, they handed me the most satisfying moment of justice I've ever had. Do I know why they treated me this way? That's a question I've asked my entire life. And I still don't have a solid answer. I once asked as a kid. They denied everything, called me spoiled, and scolded me. I gave up trying after that. But here's my theory, I think I was unplanned. They struggled to conceive my sister. She was the miracle child. But with only a small gap between us, I think I came along unexpectedly. Maybe they didn't realize my mom was pregnant until it was too late, and suddenly they had a second baby while still dealing with a newborn. They weren't well off. The extra financial burden probably added resentment. I'll never know for sure. But whatever the reason was, it doesn't excuse what they did. And now, it doesn't matter anymore. My husband and I have our suspicions that they never expected us to agree to their insane proposal. We think my sister threw a tantrum over me getting married before her, and they offered up this plan as a way to appease her while hoping we'd decline. That way, they could look like the good guys to her and have an excuse not to help me at all. But then my husband said yes, and they were stuck. So here's to peace, to cutting toxicity out of your life, and to the best wedding gift I never expected, justice. Thanks for reading, and if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and ring the bell for more shocking real-life stories you won't believe are true.